This one comes from George. Again, I think you received this one.
Yep, these are from Facebook.
Okay. Any particular area? Not mentioned. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
Long Island.
Long
George
Island.
from
Oh,
Long
George
Island.
from Long Island. Thank you. What is the greatest ethical question or problem facing the pagan community today?
You know, this question came in last night, and I was really tired, and I replied to him, "Oh, sure, George, get me in trouble," because it's a big question, and I can really only answer it from my opinion. I'm certainly not going to say what anybody's ethical this or that is in such a large group. But I will say the problem that I keep coming up against, which is, again, I'm a minister. I'm a professional minister. I do it pretty much 24/7, is misperception. Misperception. And can that go into prejudice? Absolutely.
Sure.
And yes, of course, we can see that as an ethical problem from outside the craft, but it's the ethical misconceptions within the craft that I find to be the trickiest.
So it's always within the church.
That, I mean, I have to be really careful with this because I don't want to offend people. I'm not in the business of offending people. Some days I wish I were.
But you're also an eclectic. You're.
Right, so I mean, why am I going to talk about traditions that I am not an initiated member of? That's just stupid. That's not wise. And yet there's this little Kathy Griffin part of my mind in the back that I'm trying to suppress a little right now because I could let loose. Ooh, could I have at it? But that's not helpful. Um, Certainly misconceptions and misperceptions about other people's traditions. Just the interesting interplay of, let's look at a spectrum of, for instance, the shamanic witch and the ceremonialist witch.
And most people would think a shaman is a shaman.
Well,
But
shamanic witch in my definition is somebody who it's rather point and shoot, nature based, intuitive, really, 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 really dealing with the cycles of nature. Some people would call it low magic, like make the sun shine, bring in money. Low magic is a weird term for it because it really doesn't mean low vibration. It means more of the mundane. And to me, as a witch, that is the more important in day-to-day living.
Right.
When the economy is what it is and people need help and assistance, healing magic, things of that nature, to me that is being a witch to your boots, is being able to walk it and help people. So the shaman, as the magical member of the community who sits on the edge, views things and assists on one end. On the other end, you have ceremonial magic, which may or may not involve itself in witchcraft directly. I had many misperceptions of that myself because I tried is the word, to read books on the Golden Dawn and Kabbalistic magic and just the math involved. Just the astrological hours and astrological minutes. Really, to me, and this is my own personal experience, it was a bit like reading a computer technological manual.
Binary does not compute.
It was very, very tricky for me. And then, of course, I started running into ceremonial magicians as I became more and more public. Again, this is different than the craft, although there are witches that perform ceremonial magic, certainly, and that's considered high magic. But that's high magic that has more to do with merging with universal forces. And the joke goes, how many ceremonial magicians does it take to screw in a light bulb? One to hold it while the universe revolves around it. And that's not my joke. You can Google that one.
Yeah, it's like the psychologist.
It's a lot to learn. It's a lot in there. But how immediately practical is it? I don't know. So my own misperception of that, then having met some of them, where one of them introduced themselves as, hello, I am a Hierophant. I was like, oh, really? How nice to meet you, Hierophant. I mean, before I got his name, I got his title. And that turned me off a little bit. And then, as I met more and more of them, it seemed to be very, very intellectual and a little divorced from day-to-day life. Then, we met David. David, who works with us through the Silver Broom. And he asked me not to mention his last name, but David W. I'm allowed to put an initial at the end. He's one of my friends on Facebook. You can find him on jointhecircle.com as well. There was something about this guy that broke so many of my misperceptions. Like, first of all, he tells fart jokes, which, as far as I'm concerned, you're family at that point. There's something so down to earth about him, so funny, lighthearted, yet he takes his magical work really seriously and trains people in a way that they can understand it step by step instead of just throwing them in over their heads most of the time. So that's just one example of what I mean by I think the greatest ethical problem is being able to perceive. Woo, hello bird. You see that? Oh, I hope
Well, we
that got
probably
on
got that
film.
on
That was
film.
cool. That was
Our
probably
visitor.
David shapeshifting. Come to check on me. That misperception, it's prejudice, really. And as much as it's from the outside of the craft looking in, which that we're used to. When somebody walks up and tells me, you're a baby Satan worshiper, I'm prepared for that. It's like, yeah, well, that's, I'm sure, what you think, and
Right.
keep reading those books.
So it's basically, and this is what the Tree of Avalon's here for, talking to you and talking to other things, but it's to break down the walls of misconception of different, what people do and why they do it.
And even in the craft, I think it's important that witches not confine themselves too much to only the craft. Because in my experience, and again, this is only in my experience, well, and a couple other people, we found that there was a glass ceiling in the craft. That there's only so far candles and crystals are going to take you as external modalities. That they serve a higher purpose. Of course, anything can serve a higher purpose. But really, what I love about being an eclectic is that I can study anything. And I think even within the craft, there is a bit of a prejudice against people who will, for instance, study Christianity.
Keep an open mind.
Keep an open mind with that, because wisdom is available everywhere, and if the craft really is, witchcraft is wisecraft, if being a witch is about being a wise person, then I think you have to be open, and particularly to where your gut leads you. Yeah, you can't study everything.
Right.
I mean, really, at that point, you stop eating, you stop leaving the house if you're studying all the time. To be open to where your spirit leads you. I mean, I have a basic understanding of Buddhism, but I'm not a Buddhist. But I can have a conversation with a Buddhist, and usually we get around to the topic of forgiveness and compassion, which is all about anyway. But if I have like real oh, that's Asian, that's Eastern, I only do Western, well, that's certainly a choice you can make. But if your spirit's moving you in that direction and that perception is there, that can cause some unneeded suffering.
But it might even just bring being offered to you to break down the judgment that you have to better your own work.
To see it from another side, I think, is very important for witches in general. To always keep that mind open, because you never know. And plus, everybody says, oh, we're all one, we're all one, we're all one. And then you smack your head up against a prejudicial idea. And that's a challenge.
Thanks, George.
Thank you, George.
And that was George from Long Island.